fans, welcome back to Room 237 as I continue my month of October marathon of horror anthologies. And this is a company that is known for anthologies, and I have all but one of their films. So it's one I definitely wanted to get to this month, and this is the first from that company, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors by Amicus Productions. Directed by Freddie Francis, who, of course, he directed a number of films for Hammer, such as he started with Paranoiac in 1963. And he also did Nightmare, Hysteria, Evil of Frankenstein, Dracula's Risen from the Grave. And then anthologies for Amicus, he did Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, Torture Garden, Tales from the Crypt. There was another company called Tyburn Films where he did The Ghoul and Legend of the Werewolf. Now, Amicus is a lot like Hammer, where it started later. It started, I believe, in 1962. They started with teenage musicals and then eventually went on to do horror. Like Hammer, I think, started out with film noir and mysteries and dramas, and then went into horror. But while Hammer was doing like their period gothic, modern takes on gothic films and literary films like Dracula and Frankenstein, Amicus was doing anthologies. Not just anthologies. There were films like The Beast Must Die and Now the Screaming Starts, which I also own. But they're mostly known for anthologies. And they weren't like a rival company, because they were going on the same time, but they did their own thing. And a lot of Hammer actors were in Amicus films. Like, in this one alone, you have Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing was in a number of them, but this film also has Michael Gough, Alfred, from the Burton Schumacher Batman films. He also Hammer films like Horror of Dracula. Also get an early role, like I think this was his third or fourth credit, by Donald Sutherland. I think Amicus did 7 or 8 anthologies. Their first horror film was The City of the Dead, but this was their first anthology. This was in 1965. So they did this, Torture Garden, House That Dripped Blood, Tales from the Crypt, which I also reviewed, Asylum, which thankfully is a Patreon request, so I know I got to get to that one at least, Vault of Horror, and From Beyond the Grave. I do have all of those. They also did The Monster Club, which is an anthology that I do not own. There were a couple films made after the fact, like The Uncanny, which is a anthology with Peter Cushing, which I own. That often gets mixed in with Amicus, as does Tales That Witness Madness, which these are all films I want to get to. The only one I don't own is The Monster Club. But this is their first one, and this looks like a very special edition. It's not. It literally just has the movie. And the back makes it look like black and white, which would have been cool, but it's not. And even the title is kind of somewhat misleading, because the whole film takes place in a train car. We have 5 passengers, 2 of which are Christopher Lee, Donald Sutherland, one is Roy Castle, and then 2 others. And there's room for one more, and in comes this German accent, bearded, fake eyebrow wearing Peter Cushing with a fedora, trench coat, and he has a deck of tarot cards. Now, They call him Dr. Terror, but he's credited as Dr. Terror, but he calls himself Dr. Schreck, which he says is the German word for terror, which I believe the word is Schrecken, der Schrecken. But I think it's a nod to actor Max Schreck, Count Orlok from Nosferatu. Possibly a nod to that, also with the German accent. And his House of Horrors is his deck of tarot cards. So it's not really like a House of Horrors, but the framework for the anthology is each passenger in the train car, he tells their story or their fate through tarot cards, and that's where we get our stories. This is not the strongest anthology I've ever seen. The first 2 stories are highly forgettable. The third one is an attempt at like a humorous story. It comes across like a humorous bad attempt at like a Twilight Zone episode. The last 2 stories are good, and it's mostly because one is Christopher Lee and one is Donald Sutherland. And of course, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, they bring absolute top class to their roles as always. I've reviewed a number of Hammer films with both Lee and Cushing, and even in my rants, that's one positive I've given to every film they've been in, is that they always bring just absolute, complete class and quality to their characters. Cushing is good as like even his German accent isn't that bad, but just as like this very mysterious, like, do you want to know your fate? Like, these are supposed to be tarot cards. And Lee is just this very pompous, esteemed, I guess, gentleman, but an art critic who's just a very no-nonsense naysayer to everything, like tarot cards, like the complete nonsense, like very like nose in the air snob throughout it all, but he does a great job with it. The first story is called Werewolf. Yeah, they all have very simple titles. It was written by Milton Subotsky, who also produced it. And I think he had a hand in writing a number of Amicus films. I know Robert Bloch wrote the stories for The House That Dripped Blood, which is another one that I'm hoping to get to. But the first one is Werewolf, and this one has Neil McCallum as one of the passengers. This is his story. He's an architect who returns to his old family home in Scotland to do renovations for the new owner, played by Ursula Howells. And she bought this secluded house to help recover from the death of her husband. Neil McCallum, whose name is Jim Dawson, he finds a coffin with of Count Cosmo Valdemar behind a fake wall, and pretty much he's like a werewolf, and he's the original owner of the house, killed in a conflict with his family, the Dawson family, some centuries ago. And the local legend is that he'll reclaim his former house after taking revenge on the current owner. So Dawson thinks that Ursula Howell is in danger. There's like this silver cross that sort of keeps him at bay. He takes that down, turns it into silver bullets. When the werewolf comes, he shoots, doesn't do anything, and it's because it was all a setup. Ursula Howell, is actually the Count's wife, and the actual curse is once the final descendant of the Dawson family is killed and placed in the coffin, the Count can come back in human form. And so that's his story. And each story is told, there's one final card that he reveals, which is the only way out of the tarot card's fate. And he gets death. They all get death. But Dr. Terror is reluctant to show them. It's a very forgettable story. It feels, I'm glad it's the first one, but it feels like it drags. I mean, the performances, I guess, are there. It does have its sort of moody atmosphere the way like an Amicus or Hammer film would. But then we go on to story 2, which is called Creeping Vine, and this is Alan Freeman's story. He plays a guy, Bill Rogers, which that name sounds familiar. Oh, okay, he was a DJ in the UK for 40 years. I guess he's like the pick up the pops, I guess. I'm guessing he was like the UK version of Casey Kasem or something. Filmography. He was only in a few films. Just for Fun, which is and it's Trad Dad, which are both Amicus films, but they're musicals. His story, his wife and daughter, played by Ann Bell and Sarah Nichols, return from their holiday away to find that there's this vine growing around their house. Yeah, it's a living plant story. Which, I mean, second story, living plant. Creepshow, the second story is a plant-like substance coming out of a meteor. Not saying they're connected or inspired. A lot of people find a minuscule similarity. I bet that was the inspiration. It's probably a nod to that. Like, oh, he wore a blue shirt in that movie, and this one has a blue shirt. I think they must have taken inspiration. No, they didn't. But I just made that connection myself. And it's basically a story of them trying to cut down this vine. Which I will say, I guess the optical effects, I mean, even though the plant moves very slow, I guess it's kind of cool looking. I mean, at least it's practical. There is one part where the daughter is playing fetch with the small dog, and it goes in the corner of it, like up against the house. The dog's like digging at this plant. Then we hear a whimper. The mother comes to the window, looks down. The dog is dead. It strangled it. And then like the Ministry of Defense gets involved, and basically the plants the plant becomes intelligent, becomes homicidal towards any threats. So I guess it's kind of like the thing now. And it gets through a window, strangles Bill Rogers, Alan Freeman. The final card for him, again, is death. Then we get to the third story. It's called Voodoo. And that story, it felt kind of short. It felt more like what a Tales from the Crypt episode would have been in the 60s. Which, I mean, Amicus would go on to do Tales from the Crypt Anthology 7 years later. But it also forgettable. It felt really short, too. But the third story, Voodoo, this is the sort of humorous story. Because I think Roy Castle Yeah, he's known as a comedian, singer, dancer, comedian. Died in '94. What else was he in? Not a lot. Oh, he Legend of the Werewolf. I guess mostly comedies. He plays a guy named Biff Bailey, which in the opening credits there's two bands that are credited. One is Biff Bailey's jazz band, and I think the other one is because there was jazz saxophonist Tubby Hayes. So the Tubby Hayes band is the jazz band behind Roy Castle, and then there was one other band in the credits that I think is the Haitian band, or maybe it's all the same band, whatever. But he, so, and yeah, he's definitely the humorous guy because when Cushing puts the cards in his face, because they all have to tap the cards 3 times, he's like, first time ever to do this without chips. And when he flips the cards over, one looks like a heavy set naked woman. He's like, that's my mother-in-law. And of course, Cushing gets all serious, like, never mock the judgment of a god. So he's a jazz musician. He's a trumpet player. He's going down to the West Indies to do a gig. And he's walking down by the beach, and he hears this music. And he comes across this Haitian voodoo ceremony. I mean, talented bongo players. He likes the music so much, he starts jotting down the notes because he wants to steal it. And I think this scene is supposed to be humorous because it shows him in the bushes, like, smiling, kind of bobbing around. We see a guy step up behind him, just look at him. Cuts more to the crowd doing their fire dance. And whenever it cuts back to Roy Castle, there's one more person standing behind him. So he gets caught, the sort of leader who looks like the lead biker in Friday the 13th Part 3. I don't think it is. It's probably not. But he says, you know, this is the sacred song of Dambella, which is an actual Haitian voodoo god. I'm sure Child's Play fans will say, you know, that's part of Chucky's incantation. That's his god. Ade Dewey Dambella. He steals the music anyway, and when he's with his band playing the gig, you know, wind goes around, scares the crowd, and eventually Dambella shows up and, you know, kind of comes towards him. And then it ends. A lot of times it ends before something happens. And we see his final card is also death. So then finally, we get to one of the 2 good stories. And this is the one with Christopher Lee. It's called A Disembodied Hand. The whole time while Cushing has been doing his tarot cards, everyone's asking, like, what it means, what the final card is that he won't show them. Lee is always given his snobby, like, it's absolute nonsense, it's rubbish, it's a parlor trick. And finally now Cushing gets him to go along with it. He's like, tell me my destiny. And Lee plays Franklin Marsh, who is a very snobby, pretentious art critic. And he's it's sort of a story with the critic against the artist, which the artist is played by Michael Gough, who I always like seeing because that's the Alfred I grew up with as a kid, and he's very young in this. But I like seeing him in Hammer as well. He's another very classy British actor, like Cushing and Lee. He's a very esteemed artist, but Lee thinks he's not very talented, and he's trying to, through his critique, tell people that he's not talented. And the critic is able to humiliate, Michael Gough, the artist, is able to humiliate him. One way, because when Lee presents one piece that he calls a masterpiece and how lovely it is with its contrast, its colors, and its depth, he's like, I would love to meet, this is an artist I would love to meet. And Michael Gough arranges so that a chimp comes in the room with like overalls with paint. It's pretty much, chimps are not monkeys, but to pretty much say like, you know, you don't know what art is, but you know, I bet you would praise art that even a monkey could do. And Michael Gough just keeps humiliating him publicly. Like there's this one, I guess kind of like a benefit dinner or like an honorary dinner. He tries to give a speech, but Michael Gough has like a napkin cut into chimps, throws him off. And he has Michael Gough on the brain. He cannot shake him. So finally, he decides to hit him with his car one night. He hits him with his car, and he actually runs over his hand, and he loses his hand. And eventually Michael Gough, as an artist, without his hand, has nothing to live for, commits suicide. And this is where it gets, even as hokey as it is, it's still one of the better stories, because the disembodied hand keeps coming after Christopher Lee. And yeah, the hand does look fake, it does look rubbery or whatever, but at least it's practical. At least they're making something crawl around. Like he's driving in his car, it comes up from behind his seat, tries strangling him. He throws it out the window. It shows up in his office. It attacks him. And I do like how the more time goes by, the more like purple and like aged and like rotted it looks. So he stabs it, and of course the blood in this is like the typical blood you see in a lot of European, especially Italian films, like that very vibrant, fluorescent, bright red. Puts it in a cigar box, throws it off a bridge, still comes back. It gets him in a car accident, and this is the sort of Twilight Zone twist that I also give credit to this story. I actually do like this twist, because here's one where he doesn't die. The car accident leaves him blind. So the artist, after the accident, is left without a hand, so he can't paint. The critic is left without eyes, so he can't see. He can't see the art. We get back to the train car. His final card is also death. Then we get to Donald Sutherland. And his is called Vampire. Very simple story. He has a new bride. This one doctor tries telling him that she's a werewolf. Well, there's evidence that there's a vampire around. And this one doctor, played by Max Adrian, which that sounds familiar as well. Born in 1903. Wow. This must have been one of his last. Yeah. He died 8 years later. The Terrornauts, I've heard of. Okay. Well, so he tells Donald Sutherland that she is the vampire and gives him a stake to kill her, which he does. And then the police are there. He tries to tell them that she's a vampire. It's true. Go ask Dr. Blake. Dr. Blake shows up, and he just shrugs it off. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why would I ever say your wife's a vampire? or give you a steak. You know, it's all, you're pretty much crazy. You killed your wife. So the police take him away, and that's when the doctor looks at the camera and is like, the city isn't big enough for two vampires, and then he turns into a bat himself. And yeah, this one's kind of Hammer, Universal, cheesy as well. Like, we do see the bat here, and of course it's a rubber bat that you can tell someone has a string and is going like this to flap the wings. But I like that. It has charm to it. Or when there is a bat, we just see that it's a silhouette on the wall, and yeah, you can tell it's on a string made of rubber. His final card is also death. So then everyone asks him, like, so that's the only way out is death. And then Christopher Lee finds just like, who are you? And Cushing says, haven't you figured it out yet? And they go through a tunnel. It's all dark. Cushing disappears. His cards are left on the seat. They get to their stop and they think they're fine. They're like, okay, well, nothing's happened. I guess we're okay. They get off the train and they're in some foggy, weird, sort of purgatorial area, which I think looks cool. Like, you can tell there's like matte paintings of like the green distance. There's fog, lights, and when they look over, they say Dr. Terror, but it's just like a white skeleton in a fedora, trench coat. And pretty much they died in the train crash, or there was a train crash. And Cushing was death himself. And that is Amicus's first anthology film, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. I mean, for a company that's known for anthologies, it's got a great cast, at least from three of the leads, Lee, Cushing, and Sutherland. I'd say it's a good start. It's a good start to, I guess, a series of unrelated anthologies, other than the fact that they have some of the same cast and made by the same company and same director. The first two stories are very forgettable. The third one, I think, relies too heavy on humor. I really did like the Christopher Lee story, The Disembodied Hand. It does get a little silly with the hand, but I really like the setup. I really like the twist of the Christopher Lee story. The Donald Sutherland story I also like, especially their performance. Even Peter Cushing, who literally does nothing but sit in a seat and just move cards around, he brings complete class to the role like he always does. And I always love seeing Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee share the screen together. They work so well together. And I know they're old, dear friends anyway. So you're definitely not the strongest anthology I've ever seen. I mean, some of the stories still do have a certain look to them. They do have that 60s British sort of, Hammer kind of a production value. So it has this charm to it. I actually think it was either Voodoo or The Disembodied Hand that was... Voodoo that was possibly based on the short story Papa Benjamin by Cornell Woolrich, which was also used in the television series Thriller and radio series Suspense. But even the two lesser stories are still way better than anything in Creepshow 3. I mean, at least I can still see... I can still see some sort of Tales from the Crypt or Twilight Zone elements within them. even though I know that's not what they're going for. So it's not the strongest, but for the first of its kind from the Anthology company, definitely worth checking out. Even if it's just for Cushing, Lee, and Sutherland alone. But yeah, that is Amicus's first anthology horror film, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. Thank you for watching.